Lisa L. Sears, and I'm an artist. I was actually born in Boston at the Women's Lying-In Hospital, which as a kid, I always thought that meant that I was born into a charity ward. I don't know where I got that idea. So what appealed to me about New England was the sense of history here. Also the proximity to Europe, and I've taken advantage of living in Boston and getting over to England and points beyond Germany and whatnot. So it's a good place to live for me, but I do miss Texas food, and I miss some of the manners of people down in Texas, the way that people are, and the mix of people. Actually, it's a different color mix. It's a different ethnic mix. One of the things that's very important for me with my art is that it's about communication, that it's not a one-way thing. I would like to be able to talk to people who see my work and get their feel for it, get their ideas from it as a start of a larger conversation. I often think of Kafka, Franz Kafka, the writer, who wrote Metamorphosis and The Trial and various other pieces, that when he would read his work to his friends, he would laugh. He thought it was very, very funny, and his friends were like, "Oh my gosh, this is so depressing." And people think of Kafka as this really angst-ridden guy. So I think of him with my art because sometimes people can interpret it very, very differently. I can show a particular painting, and one person came up to me one time and said, "Oh, you must have wonderful dreams. This is so imaginative. There's so much happening, and what an experience." And they came away very uplifted and excited and happy. And then about 10 minutes later, another person came by, and they looked at it and they said, "Oh, you just must have terrible nightmares." And away they go. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, with one piece, such different feelings to it. And I love that. I mean, that was actually wonderful to me to see how they experience the artwork. So I try not to worry too much that something will be interpreted as overly dark. So this is my dedicated workspace. The dog and cat can come in here with permission or when I'm not looking, but I don't have my computer in here. I don't have my other life's work in here. I don't have any editing type things in here because I really want it to be a place just for making art. I want it to be, when I walk in here, it has a certain feeling. It feels uplifting and it feels safe so that I can come in here and create. And I have all kinds of fun things to keep me amused as far as having inspiration by other artists up, my own artwork, lots of books to look through, art magazines, little bits of jewelry, and just fun things that I've collected. So I come in and I feel good and ready to work. Well, this piece I plan to have in the Malden show. It's one that I worked on this fall. I'm not absolutely 100% satisfied with it yet. So I think it just needs a little more oomph, and I'm going to work on that. So I have it hanging up right now in a very prominent place so that if I figure out what I want to do to it, I can work on it some more. But it's painted on canvas. It's acrylic, watercolor. There's also some colored chalk mixed in. I kind of like mixing different items together. And it's working on a theme that's been showing up. I'd say the last 2 years I've been thinking about this particular character here, which is basically a male figure. It's meant to be very open to interpretation, but he has a lot of pockets with the idea that there's activity going on. There could be things hidden in the pockets. I like to use a variety of materials in my art. Oftentimes I'll have on my desk where I'm working, I'll have colored pencils, I'll have watercolor, I'll have acrylic out, I'll have crayons, wax, all different kinds of things, just sort of at my hands like a mad scientist, and I can grab what I want to work with. So I like mixing things together to get layers, to get an idea of translucence or dreamlike quality or things happening underneath the surface. And I'm very much into drawing. So I find I'm unhappy if I limit myself just to painting or just to drawing. I really enjoy incorporating those two elements together. Also, I work on paper, which lends itself quite well the two things being mixed together. That's usually my preferred surface. I go back and forth between working on larger pieces, working on canvas and working on paper. And then also I have these lovely 5x7 cards that make me so incredibly happy because they're really small and they're wonderful breaks. So since I do have things up that aren't finished, I'll sit there and I'll stare at them and think about what I want to do with it. And then I'm like, oh, well, maybe I'll just sketch something out. And then I end up making a little individual piece all of its own. And I'll have a bunch going at the same time, just sort of depending on what kind of mood I'm in. Like this little guy here, I really like this little bird. So I'm going to play around with this some more. But what I've done is I've just put down a watercolor wash, and then I've gone in with some colored pencil, and I'll probably lay in some more watercolor, and then I'll go in maybe with colored pencils, maybe crayons, maybe just pen and ink to finish it up. So another fun thing with these little guys that I discovered is actually scratching into the paper. This is a better piece of paper, but I got the tip of a pen, and I've actually scratched into the surface of the paper, and then I can color on top of it with like colored pencils or wax crayons, and you have this kind of nifty little relief, which I really, really like. It's like something a third grader would do, but I love to do that. I would say my inspiration for my work is collective over a long period of time. It's hard for me to say, oh, I was inspired at age 6 by this happening. I think my inspiration really comes from how I look at the world, how I experience it, and inspiration that I get from other people, from writings by other artists, by looking at work of other artists, and a lot of fictional reading. I'll get interested in what an author will talk about their experiences as a child or history, and I'll start to incorporate that into my work. I'd also say that Jung and his ideas of the archetype, and I guess sort of the larger myth-making human experience, trying to decide our origins, asking questions. I would say that's inspirational to my work, is looking at over history the different myths that have informed people. This piece is called Ganesha's View, Grateful Passage. Change and movement are very important to me, either change within a person individually or as a group. But the idea here, it's very simple. Really, I thought of what would Ganesh, the Hindu god, what his apartment complex might look like. It's kind of, anyway, we'll keep going with that. So I was making little windows here that were looking into his world. And these are original photographs that I developed and printed myself. And some of them are Xerox copies of prints that I made, because I like the idea of referring to the same thing over time, how history changes. If you experience something and then 5 years later you go back and revisit it, it's kind of a whole new story. So I'm referring and self-referring, and actually this is a photograph of a video that I took when I was back in college, and then I went and I made prints, still prints from the video, and then I cut them out, hand-colored them, and put them in here. So there's a lot of layers of time going on. So I'm really kind of playing with myself as far as my concept of reality or history or identity. And I like to say it's a hiccup. It's a hiccup of history for me. So I have all these different layers of things going on for this one particular character that I developed. And then I built up this surface and pulled nylon across it and painted on top of it. So the idea is that you're looking into another world. Or I thought it kind of looked like a New York apartment complex. And then I hid a couple little secrets in there for people to go in and look at. This is kind of a hard piece to see unless you get really close up. So I encourage people to go in and look closely at it. I can't help but think of a story when I was in college. one of my painting professors, Vernon Fisher, who's quite an excellent painter, he nicknamed me Lisa Serious because I was so serious about my art. And I was kind of proud of that nickname, but also I think he was encouraging me to play more, because I was so very much into the existentialist, and that art was very important, and we were going to take over the world with art, and I was this little sort of socialist, that all together the artists were going to band in a group and then help make the world a better place through art. So I've gotten a little older and wiser, and I've toned things down. I do still think that art is a very important catalyst for making people think in new ways and to communicate with them. But I think I've tried to go back to being more playful and letting my work go where it wants to go. As a kid, I was one of those, all over the place, running around like a hairy goat, as my dad used to like to say. And I've tried to bring that back into my art. It's actually not hard to do. I put on some music that I really like, usually something without words, because I don't want to have my art put in a certain direction. I do use symbols in my work. I like to play around with them. I've used birds in the past as more sort of a negative or expressive, or almost like an angry Greek chorus, a harbinger of negative things to happen. That was back in college. And now, as I've gotten older, I still use birds, but I think of them in a much different way. I think of them as talking about freedom, expression, growth, sort of going out, escaping, not at all critical, not a pack, like birds on a wire, and they're chattering away, and it seems almost that they're judging people, but more birds as individuals going off into the world and expressing freedom. Another thing that shows up in my work are fish. I think of fish are really birds of the sea, and they play different roles. They can be about fertility, they can be about exploration, they can be sort of showing the inside and the outside of a person. For instance, a fish with the bone showing is not really a negative or frightening thing. It's more sort of thinking about the internal life of the fish and showing it in a very concrete way by showing the bones, by showing the layers within the creature. So I think nature is symbolically important to me. And also people. I have different sort of heroes in my story, often the young girl or the woman going out into the world, discovering herself and making her way in the world. So a lot of people will see women in my work. This is a piece that I made in college, and it was actually sort of a healing piece for me, in that I was leaving Austin, where I had many wonderful friends. I loved living there, and I loved being in school and making art there, and I had decided to move up to New England for this great experiment. And this was a piece that I made to myself to say goodbye to Austin. And it was the first time that the fish showed up in my work. If I'd been using birds, the birds would have been flying around making lots of noise and squawking. But here the fish are encouraging this character to go out into the world and try something new. So the fish are coming out of the water, they're about movement, they're about growth. There's even a fish in the sun up in the left-hand corner. And she's saying goodbye, throwing the flowers. So it's an indulgent piece, I suppose. And actually another symbol I used more last summer. I haven't made any recent pieces with the bird nest. And thinking of the nest as a nest is to a rowboat as a rowboat is to a bathtub. They're all vessels. I think they have similar shapes. But one thing that was so wonderful when I was working on these bird nests is I actually found one. I was out walking my dog and I was daydreaming, thinking about art, and lo and behold, here was this bird nest right at my feet. And I just thought, well, how wonderful at this moment, as I need a real bird's nest to look at. So I enjoyed for months actually drawing bird's nests and eggs, and I think from that, then I've started using birds in my art. This piece, it seems to catch people's attention, which I find interesting. It's actually made out of an old curtain pull-down shade that was in the house that my husband and I moved into, and I just couldn't stand to throw them out. I really thought I would find a good use for this thing. So I was thinking about a conversation that I had with one of my sisters, and we play this game of, if you could be anything, blah, blah, blah. If you could go anywhere, blah, 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 sort of. And one of the things was, if you could have a superhuman power, if you could be a superhero, what would that be? And from that conversation, this piece actually was made. So I thought, well, what if a person received her greatest gift that she had always wanted, but then there might be another part of her that would have to pay a price for that, or that there would be an exchange that would happen. So this piece is really, I mean, it's fairly straightforward in that she wishes she could fly. That's this character's greatest wish, is have the ability to fly like a bird. But in doing so, even as she's being granted this boon or this wish with the wing, she suddenly loses something. She loses one of her hands. So this is her hand and her arm being sacrificed. And sort of here is the fire coming up, the purification fire, the good and evil that's inside of all of us, the struggles that we have. And I would like this picture really to be about her moment of acknowledgement or understanding or surprise that, she's suddenly given up something very precious. So that could be about knowledge, it could be about desire, it could be about longing. Actually, I heard a great talk by Melissa Miller, and she's a Texas artist, and this was years and years and years ago, and she has very colorful, bright, huge paintings with animals running all over the place, and fires, and just fabulous colors. And I went and I heard this lecture, and she ended the lecture by, she said, and now I'd like to play tribute to the person who made it all possible. So Melissa Miller goes and she turns on this stereo, and it starts blaring James Brown. And she said, James Brown made it all possible. I thought, what fun. So I don't have a music box to blare out triumphant music, but I just like that idea of like, ta-da, okay, we're done, ta-da!